The first time I had to say my name and say that I was an alcoholic, I whispered it. It's so easy to forget that you're an alcoholic. You wanna forget it. You don't want to be different.
There's a lot of shame, loneliness, and heartache that goes along with being an addict. I'm Elizabeth Pearson Garr, and this is the Experience Podcast. On this episode, my guest, Karen Petersen, takes us into that world and back out again. Karen's story of alcoholism, treatment, and recovery shows us the power of commitment, strength, and vulnerability. Hi, Karen. Thank you for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to meet you.
You too. Thank you. I appreciate you talking about this. There might not be a lot of people who identify themselves as in recovery who would be willing to speak openly on a podcast about their journey. And to me, that kind of speaks to the stigma that is associated with this disease. And I don't quite understand that, because there's nothing to be ashamed of about having a disease. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I just really have started being truly open about my own alcoholism over the past year and a half. And this summer, God willing, I'll have 20 years.
Well, congratulations.
So it is, thank you. Again, God willing.
How did that feel for you to start being honest about it?
It was Health Day and they wanted a testimony. And I said, I'll give you a testimony. I've got a story to share. And afterwards, I didn't really think too much about it, but one of the founders of the facility said, that was really brave of you. And I'm like, crap, what did I do? So there was that immediate, no big deal. And then all of a sudden I thought about it and it's like, oh, it's out there. But that led me to the next piece, which was finally writing about it. So now it's just kind of another part of who I am. But you asked about why don't people want to talk about it? There is still a stigma. It is a disease, but people don't understand it. They can't see it. You have a broken arm. You can see the x-ray. There's a broken bone. That makes sense to people who might not have a broken bone. You see a tumor. You can see that up there when the radiologist shows it. That's devastating, but it can make sense. You hear about addiction. You see people who drink like I drank and couldn't stop and behaved erratically and sometimes horribly. And that just is annoying to the family and friends around you, unless you really understand the chemical reactions within the brain that, you hit that first drink and something happens and you're off and running.
I think some people think it's a moral failure as opposed to a chemical disease. Can you talk to that difference?
Yeah. I am not perfect by any means, and I've had moral failures in my lifetime, but spiritual, mental, emotional, everything. It's a very complete who you are disease. It's in your makeup. It's hard to study from a research perspective because there is DNA, there is the genetic factor, but there's also the environmental factor. So I grew up with an alcoholic and I share DNA with my dad, who was an amazing, but unfortunately an alcoholic father. I have two siblings. They didn't become alcoholics. It is a progressive disease. So a lot of times if people do relapse, maybe they've been sober or clean for 10 years, it's as if they never stop. It's as bad or worse than it was when they quit in the first place.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story when you started drinking?
Yeah.
Did you have sort of a rock bottom moment that led you to finally seek treatment?
I had a rock bottom moment, but it was kind of boring. I didn't really drink in high school, a handful of times, but I had very overprotective parents and I did not want to get into trouble. Now, there were a few times that I did drink. And the warning signs were there. There was the homecoming night in 10th grade when I went to the Sofitel, which is a fancy pants hotel and restaurant. And my date brought in a bottle of wine. We were 15 years old, mind you, brought in a bottle of wine. They served us. I was very uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable around people in general. I was not good with intimacy. I was good with small talk. So he was talking about prom and things like that. And that was a long way off. And so every time I felt uncomfortable, I would just take another swig and I just felt better. And the more uncomfortable I got, the more I drank. And it was just magic. It was a transformation. I didn't understand it, but I liked it. For dessert, they brought strawberries and creme fraiche. Well, he stepped away to do something, and I puked in my creme fraiche with the strawberries. And the waiter came over, the server came over and said, "Miss," would have been like, "Get this kid out of here." But they said, the restroom is over there. I'm like, "No, I'm good. Excuse me, sir, where did you say that restroom was?" So that was awful. I don't remember the whole night. So that was my first blackout. I don't know how my parents didn't know what was going on with me. I think I just went straight home, said I don't want to talk about it, and I just probably passed out. But the indications that I would be drinking alcoholically were there from the beginning. We did a little champagne breakfast sometimes in high school where my smart friends and I would skip first period. I remember being at this friend's house and I went into the other room to drink more. And another one of the friends came in and she said, "Karen, you don't have to sneak." And I think this was 10th grade also. But that struck me. It's like I already knew I was hiding something. I had something to hide. And I think when you drink and you drink alcoholically, there's a lot of shame. And that shame had been festering for a while. It didn't necessarily start when I started drinking. It is a spiritual disease.
Because you knew your father was an alcoholic, did that click in your mind, or were you too young to think, maybe this is something I should watch out for? I mean, 15 years old, your brain is not fully developed. So you're probably not putting two and two together.
So, Elizabeth, I was a sick little puppy. I might not have drank a whole lot, but I would binge. I was looking to fill a hole. And I remember saying when I grow up, and I still can't believe I said this to myself, maybe I'll be an alcoholic instead because that's fewer calories. And that's how sick I was.
Doesn't your heart just break for that girl?
It does. Oh my gosh, that's such a good way of putting it. Yes.
Just kind of want to go back and just
give
hug her.
Hug. Yeah, I felt lonely a lot. I felt different. I felt, and you'll hear this when you talk to other people who are going through recovery, that they felt like they did not get the instruction manual. Everyone had this guide on how to live, I got the eat, breathe, walk part, but anything beyond that, that was just too advanced. I couldn't figure it out. I went to college and that was my entree into alcohol because it was accepted.
And you were free. You didn't have to, you weren't under your parents' thumb anymore.
Right. I wasn't afraid of getting into trouble. And so I would go to the bars. I didn't necessarily like alcohol. So I tried the vodka Collins because that was a little sweeter and that was my thing. And then before long, I was drinking beer, but I was blacking out. I was kissing boys. I was not remembering it. The guilt was deepening and thickening, and it was already becoming very burdensome. In the morning, I would feel awful, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I'd physically have a headache. I'd feel nauseous. And I would pray and I would say, "Dear God, I'm so sorry. I promise I won't do this again. Please help me not to do this again." You know, growing up, one of our neighbors was an alcoholic and had the bumper sticker "one day at a time" on her car. And so I knew what it was related to. I didn't realize that there was a whole program you needed to follow to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say, just today, let me not drink. And sure enough, the next opportunity, which was usually that evening, I just kind of, shield my face and, don't look at me, God, because I'm going to go out and do exactly what I did the night before, despite the consequences.
And was the impetus again, like at the Sofitel Hotel, of I just want to be a better conversationalist, or I want to feel more comfortable here? Or what do you think? Was it even a conscious motivation, or is it just an instinct?
It was pretty much it was confidence builder. I'd go into a crowd of people and I would just feel more comfortable. I'd be pretty outgoing, but I really didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. So it was a matter of going out there, seeking that fun, seeking something outside of myself, because being alone with myself was not a great place for me to be, because I didn't like all this. I didn't like who I was. I didn't really know who I was.
And I'd imagine that's a pretty common path for anybody growing up, but there's something different in an addict's brain. I mean, I relate to a lot of that. As I was growing up, I didn't really know who I was, and I had a lot of self-confidence issues and a lot of questioning, but I didn't turn to alcohol. I didn't binge on alcohol. I didn't have the same thing. So there's something different, that certain people are powerless over alcohol.
The powerlessness is real. It's not the fifth or sixth drink that does you in. It's the first one. One drink is never enough, and one drink is always too much, because it triggers that insatiable thirst to have more, more, more. And I'll use this as an example. There were times where I tried to stop. The first time I called an 800 number, I was a sophomore in college. And I just wanted them to fix me. But he said, no, you've got to, go to meetings. I'm like, you want me to go somewhere? I wanted the easy way out. And I didn't want to be an alcoholic. Who wants to be an alcoholic? And once you say it, then it's hard to bring those words back in. So I knew where I was headed, but I was going to fight it with everything I had. I mean, I wanted to be a normal drinker. So I guess I was 18 when I went into college as a freshman. So already the second year, I'm thinking, hey, I have a problem. But that didn't stop me. I continued. And, normal people like you, Elizabeth, can have a drink if you want one or not. And if you have part of one, if you don't want the rest, you'll set it down. I was home for Thanksgiving with my sister, and we were having Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, and she dumped her glass into the sink, and my body physically lurched toward the glass, and she looked at me, and it was so instinctive to save the wine. Save the wine. You don't waste wine. I could have had some more. And she looked at me like, that was strange, but that's how we're wired. If you've got it, you drink it. Alcoholism and addiction might not make sense to the non-user or non-drinker, but the ability to walk away doesn't always make sense to us, at least when we're in active addiction.
Well, because it's a brain wiring issue, right? And people think differently.
Yes. And as far as the brain wiring, I also later in life was diagnosed with ADHD, non-hyperactivity, and also general anxiety disorder. So I had those anxieties when I went out, and I was self-medicating for a long, long time.
So what led you to finally go into treatment? 2002. So that was, I don't know how many years. I believe I read 15 years or so that you said you were actively drinking.
15 years I drank. 15 years I tried to stop. It was an ongoing battle. It was a true cycle of insanity. So in 2000, actually, was the first time I went to a treatment center. And that was after I had behaved very, very badly at my sister's wedding. That was also the first time my sister said, honey, you seem to drink to excess a lot. And I said, I know. And she was like, oh, phew, I thought you were going to get really mad at me, because the defensiveness can come out really easily in some of us also. But that was the day of her wedding. The night before, I had too much to drink. And she said, I watched you and you were in a corner just trying to get more and more. And I said, I know, I promise I won't get drunk tonight. Well, I waited till after the wedding and I got drunk and I behaved really badly, very shamefully, very, there are not enough adjectives or adverbs to describe how horribly I acted that night. But the next day I said, I'm going to treatment. This has to stop. So I got in there and they suggested I stay like overnight. And I thought, don't you know who I am? You know, my people need me. I can't stay here. And she said, well, if you're a daily drinker, you'll need to safely detox and you really do need that deeper level of care. And I said, I will go home and think about it. And I walked out and I saw a cluster of people smoking. So my husband had no experience with alcoholics. For him, you talk about the stigma, it's the stereotype of the drunk in the street with the brown bag, with the vodka bottle. But he knew it was pretty bad. He knew I was pretty ridiculous at this point, and he was getting pretty irritated. But I got home and he said, how was it? I said, you're right. I'm not an alcoholic. They all smoke. So he said, see, I told you, you're not an alcoholic. You just need to stop when I tell you to stop. And I said, that sounds like a great idea.
You created your own alternate reality.
I did. It was beautiful. And that alternate reality lasted 2 more years. And it was awful because I had already taken a step toward recovery and jumped back. But part of me already knew that a better life was available, but I had to choose it. At some point, I quit trying to control my drinking, and I just said, screw it. If I can't control it, I'm just going to run with it. And I did. One night, it was June 20th, 2002. At that point, I was still at the TV station. I was drinking every night. I'd have 2 bottles of wine. I'd have to go to different grocery stores on the way home because heaven forbid somebody think I'm an alcoholic, because they see me buying wine every night. It's exhausting. And so I'd buy 2 bottles. I would drink one, and then I'd save a little bit in the second one. So my husband would only think I drank part of one.
Oh, you had a whole plan. It was like a puzzle.
Yes, it was a very good. Yes, I thought I was so smart. But one night he came back and my words were slurred. And I asked him what was wrong. I knew full well what was wrong. And he said, I'm sick and tired of you getting drunk every night for no reason. And my mind just cleared up. And it was what I consider to be a God-given moment of clarity. And I said, I am too. I was finally sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I went to the phone book. I called a place up in Nashville called Cumberland Heights, and I went up there the following morning. I stopped by the TV station, told my boss, and he said, okay, I'm glad you're doing what you need to do. It was hush hush, of course. Don't want to make the viewers uncomfortable. So I went up there. I was there for as long as I needed to be there, which was 7 or 8 days, and that really gave me the start I needed. It was beautiful. I needed to get away. I needed to get out of my routine. That's what I got. But a lot of people need more than that. And typically it's insurance stops paying at point A, so you're out. A lot of people need more. Our healthcare system really is messed up in a lot of ways. So I took 2 weeks off total. And that 2-week period, my time at Cumberland Heights, saved my life. I loved the fellowship. I was reading what we call the big book in 12-step recovery programs. And I was reading these different stories and I thought, wow, that's how I feel. Oh my gosh, that's how I feel. And you suddenly realize you're not alone. That is a beautiful place to be when you have felt so alone and isolated. No matter how many people are around you, no matter how many people love you, you just have this feeling of loneliness.
What else goes on in treatment? I mean, you said it's physically detoxing, so clearly you're not allowed to drink.
Right.
And then it's therapy, and what else?
It's different depending on the substance. But for me with alcohol, I was in the detox section for about 2 days. They medicated me as a means of safely detoxing. And then you're in a group and you have group meetings. There are clinical psychologists and therapists there. They took us to 12-step meetings out in the community. The first time I had to say my name and say that I was an alcoholic, I whispered it. Because again, it's that thing, once it's out there. And it felt really good to say it after a while because you're reminding yourself. It's so easy to forget. It's so easy to forget that you're an alcoholic. You want to forget it. You don't want to be different. But going to meetings, sticking with people who are in the program, who are in recovery, who you can learn from, who you can help, reminds you why you do these things. And then if you see people who are just coming in and, you can be an example for them and you can remember where you could be at that moment. It's a gift, but I would not have this gift if I had not gotten to that point of complete hopelessness. And I had that glimmer of hope. And I still did have my faith, even though I did turn my back on God because I just didn't want to look him in the eye.
I have a very good friend who's in recovery too. And she said, the fact that I'm an addict and I'm in recovery is a miracle. She said, I consider my life a miracle. And
absolutely.
I thought that was just so powerful. She does not take it for granted one bit.
No, and that's why I say, God willing, this summer, anything can happen. My dad died 3 months after I got out of treatment. And I had been hoping to go to a meeting with him over Christmas when I was back in Minneapolis. I loved him so much, but it was really hard to watch him at night when he would go from this man I loved and admired and become this different personality. If you've got cancer or other diseases that affect the body so atrociously, they don't change your behavior, but when you're using, you are selfish, you are, sometimes you're mean. I made really bad choices. My life was in peril on more than one occasion. I would leave the bars in Minneapolis with men I didn't know. One was a strong-armed former felon. I didn't know that at the time, but God wanted to keep me around for something. And I'm so grateful because left to my own devices, I really shouldn't still be here. And I'm so grateful that I'm here. I'm grateful that I have a job. I have 2 children now. They're 14 and 16. I never wanted children while I was drinking. Gosh, they would interfere with my drinking routine at night. I'd have to feed them and put them to bed. And I think there are baths involved.
You'd have to be responsible.
Yes. So I think that's another thing associated with the stigma and how do we understand this? And we love these people who are alcoholics or addicts. And I have loved an alcoholic with all my heart. And that was my father. But I still would get so mad at him. And I now in retrospect wish I could go back to the hurt father, the hurt person that he was, and dig in more because I know that there was a lot of shame that he was carrying. I have struggled and I know that he struggled just like I did. And that softens me toward him.
Yeah. It's just sad. Everybody struggles, right? It's just how we deal with it. And I guess if you're dealing with it by muting it with a substance, then you can't relate to the person. Whereas if the person in your life, your friend or your family member or your partner is sober and you're both struggling or one of you is struggling, at least you can have a conversation about it. But if one of you is high, then you can't connect.
Right. And my mom was, and I just lost her. She was amazing. She was not an alcoholic at all. She would rarely drink anything, but she was a big codependent. So I watched her and I watched her count his beers before she went to work at night. Then she would punish him by not talking to him the next day. So there was a lot of dysfunction. That doesn't happen in our house today because I don't drink. But that's not to say I don't make bad decisions. But we have the program that even when we veer off, we can kind of straighten the tracks out a little bit. And we have people in our networks who are honest with us and tough on us and will give us a kick in the rear if we need it.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like then when you came out of treatment and then were released into the real world, or how did that transition feel?
The real world sucks.
Oh, does it? Thanks for the news.
It doesn't now. So when I first got out, I told you I took a few more days off of work. I just needed to be. I went to see my big fat Greek wedding.
Oh, I remember that.
With my friend. There's a scene where they're doing ouzo shots and they're going, and they're having so much fun. And I became so resentful because I thought I can't drink at my own child's wedding. Keep in mind, I didn't even have children. And that's why the one day at a time piece is so important. And that's an example of someone who's early in recovery. So what was it like to be in early recovery? It was really hard. I was always used to having something in my hand. So I started drinking coffee at night, something I'd never done, just so I had something in my hand. I started reading a lot more. I was used to watching TV and drinking, so I had to do something different. They say, all you have to change is everything.
Simple as that. No problem at all.
My husband and I went out a lot. We had parties, and so those stopped. But then I started going to meetings. I found a group that I loved with really amazing people. I went to, right out, I went to 90 meetings in 90 days, which is, not official program stuff. So right now I still go to one meeting a week. It's my favorite, Saturday mornings, 10 a.m. I love that meeting. There's a whole lot of people who have been in the program for a long, long time. And there's people who are just coming in. And then there's also those who have relapsed and are coming back. So it's a really good opportunity to just be with people who get you. It's always fun to go on New Year's Day, because that's a day that was bad for a lot of us when we were in active addiction or alcoholism. A lot of bad New Year's Eves. There were a lot of New Year's Days. I'm never drinking again.
That was the number one resolution that would always get broken.
Yeah. One time it took 3 weeks for it to get broken. That was the longest I went. We went to see Cats at the Civic Center here. And my husband hates musicals, and I like them, but this one I just personally didn't care for. But we went to the little bar at intermission, and I said, I'll have a glass of wine. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. I went 3 weeks. I'm good. I proved to myself I'm not an alcoholic. So we had a glass of wine. Then I had another one. And I said, let's just go home. So then we're driving home. I'm like, but we need to stop at the store because I need to buy a bottle of wine. And that's how one is never enough.
The slippery slide began right there.
And it was the same cycle of insanity. So even after this amount of time, people say, well, don't you graduate? You still have to go to meetings. And you don't graduate, because I need to remember, because it's easy to forget. Somebody got a 5-year medallion on my first week. And I thought, holy crap, how can she, 5 days was beyond me until I went to treatment. And I thought, 5 years. And she said, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And there would be times where I was struggling and I wanted a drink. And I'd say, if she could do it, I can do it. And, it was that easy, but not that easy.
There's an authenticity too that is fostered in that AA vernacular and just the culture, right? People need to show up as they are and who they are. That I think is lovely, that I kind of wish would be in the general culture.
Yeah. And we are careful to call them 12-step meetings. We've got quotes all over the walls. One of my favorite ones is, dear God, teach me to laugh again, but don't let me forget that I cried.
Wow, that's powerful.
Because there were a lot of tears, even in high school, there were a lot of tears. And I laugh today and I feel good. For the most part, I still have issues. Life still happens, but I can go back. If I do something stupid or bad, I can make an amend. I can apologize. If somebody hurts me, I'm able to say, you know what, that's their deal. It's not mine. It's wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in those rooms. Not necessarily from me, but from a lot of the other folks in there.
Yeah, just as a conglomerate. When you get a lot of people together with a lot of life experience, there can be a lot of wisdom gleaned.
Early on, I was like, this is like free therapy, but it's so much more than that. I tried to understand why it worked because I had tried everything else to not drink. I had tried all the self-will in the world. I'm not going to do it. I'm disciplined. And somehow these 12-step programs can work.
What would you say to a younger person, or any person? I guess they don't have to be a young person. I guess I was just thinking of, your younger self, but it could be anyone. Do you ever see someone or maybe know someone in your life that you'd love to intervene and kind of say, I've been down that path. How about take a right turn here? Or do you not see that that's your role?
There have been times where people have reached out to me. That's been a blessing in sharing my story as well. I've become a resource for some people, but nobody's going to do anything unless they hit that point where they are sick and tired of being sick and tired. The best advice in the world, if that person isn't ready, they're not going to take it. There were times where I had wished my family would intervene because I just didn't know if I could go on much longer. And I didn't have the guts or whatever it was I needed to make that phone call or to ask for help. Asking for help is scary.
Because it's admitting a weakness, I guess.
It's admitting a weakness. It's admitting that you've got this thing. Mm-hmm. It's admitting that I'm an alcoholic.
Is that one reason that the 12-step program makes you say, I am an alcoholic, is because it's so hard to initially admit it to yourself?
You know what? I don't know. I have no idea. But I will say when I got into the habit of doing that and I was back at work doing interviews for the news channel, I would arrive on locations and I'd put my hand out and I'd say, hi, I'm Karen. I'm with Channel 31.
I'm an alcoholic with Channel 31.
So I don't know that I ever actually said it, but it was there.
That's interesting.
So many people have stereotypes of what an alcoholic is, what a drug addict is. And that scares a lot of people. So when I spoke to that group, going back to that first time I really shared my story, I told them that they would be really surprised. I said, the next time you think of an alcoholic or a drug addict, think of me. I said, actually, you'd be surprised. We're everywhere. There are a lot of us, and there are even more who aren't in recovery. And it's not easy. There was a time I drove to that Saturday morning meeting, and I sat down, and I felt as empty as all get out. And I thought, is this my life? Coming to these meetings every Saturday for the rest of my life? And I ran out and I was in tears, and a man was coming in late and he said, Karen, what's wrong? And I said, I feel so alone. He said, you're never alone. I still drove off, but that also stayed with me. And so I would hope that people who are going through something, no matter what it is, no matter how hopeless it seems, that they're never alone. And no matter what's going on, no matter how dark the tunnel, there is another side. They just have to have that chance and give themselves the opportunity to get there.
And that's why it's great to have a program, whether it's the 12-step program or the treatment center or something, because I think when you are dealing with something, especially by yourself, and you don't know what is the path, where do I go next? How do I get from here to there? I think a lot of people don't know what step to take.
And that's why it's great to find somebody. They say, find someone who has what you want. Find someone who has that glimmer in their eye, that has that serenity. That's something that you get in recovery. It can slip away when you kind of get off track. But when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's such a peaceful life. and it can be fun. And it's still, even after 20 years, isn't always easy. So that is something I really want to drive home, that it's not always easy. Even after 20 years I've had dreams where I've been drinking and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get a white chip, which is what you have to do if you relapse. So I don't have many of those dreams anymore, but every once in a while one will creep in and it's like, oops, better get to a meeting.
Do you have a literal urge to taste alcohol still?
Not necessarily. There are some times where it's like you'll go back to a period of time, the 4th of July, when you're outside barbecuing, and all of a sudden you'll have a fleeting thought. And it doesn't happen often. It's learning tools and learning different behaviors and then doing, hey, what's the next right thing? And that's something we learn in recovery also. Do the next right thing. And that's something I've told my children. There are a lot of these little sayings and lessons that you can incorporate into your parenting. I don't know that they listen to me, but it's worth a shot.
One day at a time is one that I think we can all use for everything. It helps ease anxiety and worry. Just take it one day at a time.
Absolutely. And the serenity prayer is a big one too.
Yeah.
If you have a loved one who is in addiction, I would say be tough love. Be compassionate, be loving, but don't enable. If there is a child, an adult child who you keep bailing out, that's not going to help that person. In college, I would write a bunch of checks and I would go under and my mom would say, well, what's going on? And I'd say, well, I guess I'm just hungrier than most people. I'm eating. And she'd be like, oh, okay. And she'd put more money in there. And I'm thinking, oh, if only.
She was looking the other way, enabling.
But I think yes, she was enabling. But I think, be compassionate. Even if you don't understand, try and learn. And that may give you a different perspective. There's still no excuses, but know what you're dealing with. Know it's not a bad person. Knowing it's probably a really good person who's got a lot of pain inside and is making some really bad choices.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. Alcoholism is not a moral failure.
No, not at all. And I think recovery helps you see that, and it helps you be the person you want to be. And for me, a person of faith, it's helped me become the person I think God wanted me to be. And he's not done with me yet. And I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be right now.
That's great. I really appreciate you doing this and being so open to share your story. I think it's admirable, all that you've been through and all that you are still going through, and that you're willing to share it with me and with so many other people. So I'm deeply grateful.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And plus, you're just fun. So it was great to meet you.
Thank you. You're fun too. I was really touched by Karen's transparency, and I so admire how hard she's worked and continues to work to be where she is today. I learned so much from Karen, and I'm deeply grateful to her for sharing her experiences with me. Here are some of my takeaways from our conversation. Number 1, drinking to excess is about a lot more than just the alcohol. 2, addiction afflicts so many people around us, more than we probably know. Can we please finally stop judging them and acting as if it's a moral failure? 3, help can come in the form of like-minded people, constant support, listening, and tough, honest love. 4, if you have someone in your life who's abusing alcohol or drugs, don't look away. Be compassionate and try to learn, but don't keep writing checks or tell them they're not really an addict. 5, you're never really alone. And I'll end with a few phrases that Karen shared that can apply to all of our lives. Dear God, teach me to laugh again, but don't let me forget that I cried. Do the next right thing. One day at a time. Please check out our website, theexperiencepodcast.net, to explore other episodes, sign up for our insiders list and newsletter, and find out how to follow us on social media. And if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It helps others discover us. I'm Elizabeth Pearson Garr. Thanks for joining in The Experience.